of betrayal and loss. "I curse you!" Ade screamed, his voice rising above the crackling flames. "I curse this village. May it rot. May nothing grow here, and may no living thing ever find peace in Akuru. You will all suffer for your blindness, for your refusal to see the truth." The village burned him alive, but he was innocent. In a time not too distant from our own, the quiet and prosperous ancient African village of Akuru thrived with little to no help from other surrounding villages. Akuru was known for its vast farmland and courageous warriors. It was a close-knit community where everyone knew each other by name, and its people took great pride in their traditions and sense of unity. At the center of the village were three boys, Ade, Shefu, and Kwasi, who had grown up together, forming an inseparable trio. They laughed, played, and dreamed together, making plans for a future where they could lead the village as men of honor. The bond between Ade and Shefu, however, was stronger. They were like brothers, both born on the same day, both destined for greatness. Ade's father, Chief Kola, was the village's most respected elder. He ruled Akuru with wisdom and fairness, his reputation extending beyond the village borders. Ade admired his father greatly and aspired to follow in his footsteps. Shefu's father, meanwhile, was a humble farmer who instilled the values of hard work and loyalty in his son. Shefu admired Ade's father just as much and had always considered Chief Ola a mentor. Kwasi, the third friend, came from a lesser-known family. Though close to Ade and Shefu, he had always lived in the shadows of their greatness, secretly nurturing feelings of envy, though neither of his friends noticed this at the time. Life continued as usual for the boys until a day arrived that would tear their world apart. It was the night of the Grand Harvest Festival, a time when the entire village celebrated their fruitful year. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of freshly prepared food. The villagers danced around a large fire in the center of Akuru, their spirits high. But in the dead of night, screams echoed through the village, sending the chill through everyone. Chief Ola was found dead in his hut. His body sprawled on the floor, blood staining the woven mats beneath him. His eyes were wide open in a frozen look of horror. The once lively village fell silent, consumed by shock and disbelief. Ade rushed to the scene, his heart racing. When he saw his father's lifeless body, something inside him shattered. His father, his hero, was gone. The grief that swept over him was unbearable, but something else gnawed at his soul. Who could have committed such a brutal act? The village elders immediately began investigating the murder. They interrogated everyone who had seen or interacted with the chief that day. It wasn't long before whispers started to spread through the village. Several people claimed to have seen Shefu near the chief's hut late that night. One villager even said they heard Shefu arguing with Chief Ola earlier in the morning. Shefu was horrified by the accusations, swearing to anyone who would listen that he had nothing to do with Chief Ola's death. But Ade, consumed by grief and shock, found it hard to trust his closest friend. The pain of losing his father clouded his judgment, and Kwasi, always lingering nearby, added fuel to the fire by reminding Ade that betrayal often comes from those closest to us. Shefu was like family, Kwasi would say, shaking his head. But sometimes, the ones we love are capable of the greatest harm. How could he not have been involved? The weight of the accusations soon became too much to ignore. The elders called for a village council to decide Shefu's fate. Shefu, just a teenager at the time, could not face the death penalty. But the elders deemed him guilty based on circumstantial evidence and the testimonies of the villagers. The decision was made. Shefu would be banished from Akuru for life, never to return. His punishment was a fate worse than death, forced to wander alone, cut off from the only home he had ever known. As the village gathered to watch Shefu's banishment, he stood at the edge of the village, shackled and broken. His heart filled with bitterness. His eyes searched the crowd for Ade, his best friend, the brother he had grown up with, hoping for a sign of belief in his innocence. But Ade stood among the villagers, his face etched with a mixture of sorrow and anger. Shefu's heart sank. The bond they had shared, the years of friendship, were gone in an instant. A deep bitterness took roots in Shefu's heart as he was led out of the village. "I didn't do it," Shefu said one last time, his voice hoarse and strained. "I didn't kill your father, Ade." Ade said nothing, his fists clenched at his sides, his grief too heavy for words. As Shefu disappeared into the horizon, the once tight bond between the two boys turned into a festering wound. Years passed, but neither Ade nor Shefu could move on. Ade, now the chief of Akuru, bore the weight of his father's legacy. The grief over his father's death still clung to him, but what plagued him more was the memory of Shefu. Deep down, there was a nagging doubt, a question he had never allowed himself to fully confront. Could Shefu really have killed Chief Ola? Kwasi, always by Ade's side, would remind him of Shefu's betrayal whenever that doubt surfaced, keeping the hatred between the two alive. Shefu, on the other hand, wandered from village to village, consumed by bitterness and anger. The betrayal by Ade, the one person he had thought would always stand by him, festered in his heart. The years of exile hardened him, and soon revenge became his sole purpose. He trained, waiting for the day he would face Ade again. The desire for blood had transformed him into a cold, calculating warrior. He knew that one day he would return to Akuru, and when he did, he would settle the score. 15 years after his banishment, the day finally came. Shefu heard whispers that Ade was leading a hunting party near the borders of Akuru. His time had come. Ade, unaware of the storm approaching, had gone out with his men to hunt, seeking a brief respite from the duties of leadership. But his thoughts often wandered to the past, to the night his father died, and the boyhood friend who had been banished because of it. As Ade and his hunting party prepared to make camp, a rustling sound came from the trees. Ade stood, sword in hand, his eyes narrowing as he looked into the forest. Out of the shadows stepped Shefu. He had grown lean and hardened from years of wandering, but his eyes still held the same fire Ade remembered from their youth. "Shefu," Ade breathed, his heart pounding. "It's been a long time," Shefu replied, his voice cold. "But I haven't forgotten. Tonight, we end this." Ade's men drew their weapons, but Shefu was quick, his movements precise as he incapacitated several of them before they could even react. Ade raised his sword, knowing there was no avoiding the confrontation. "I trusted you," Ade shouted, his voice raw with years of pent-up emotion. "I trusted you and you killed my father." "I didn't," Shefu's voice cracked with anger. "You were supposed to believe me. You were supposed to know me better than anyone. But you banished me. You condemned me." The fight between the two was brutal, years of hatred driving their every strike. The sound of clashing swords echoed through the trees, but neither seemed to gain the upper hand. Just as it seemed they might fight to their deaths, a voice cut through the chaos. "Enough!" Both men turned to see Kwasi standing on the edge of the clearing. His face, once so familiar, now seemed twisted with something darker, something that neither Ade nor Shefu had ever seen before. Kwasi approached them slowly, his eyes gleaming with a strange satisfaction. "You are both such fools," he said, shaking his head. "You've spent all these years hating each other over something that was never true." Ade and Shefu exchanged confused glances before turning back to Kwasi. "What are you talking about?" Ade demanded, his sword still raised. Kwasi smiled, his teeth flashing in the dim light. "I killed Chief Ola." The words hit like a thunderclap. For a moment, neither Ade nor Shefu could process what they had just heard. "What?" Ade whispered, his grip on his sword loosening. Kwasi shrugged, his expression cold. "It was simple, really. I was always envious of you two, always playing second fiddle to your friendship. So I killed Chief Ola and framed Shefu. I knew it would tear you apart, and it worked. Just look at you two. 15 years of hatred, wasted lives, and now you are here, ready to kill each other." Shefu's hand shook with rage. You destroyed everything." Kwasi's grin widened. "And I'm not finished yet." Before either man could react, Kwasi pulled out a concealed knife and drove it into Shefu's side. Shefu gasped, stumbling back as blood began to pour from the wound. Ade rushed towards him, but Kwasi stepped between them, a twisted smile still on his face. "I'll kill you both," Kwasi said, his voice low. "And the village will think you two killed each other. The perfect end to a perfect plan." However, Kwasi did something unexpected. Kwasi plunged the knife into his own heart, collapsing beside Shefu, a look of satisfaction on his face even as he breathed his last breath. Ade dropped to his knees beside Shefu, his mind reeling from the revelation. Shefu, gasping for air, looked up at Ade, his eyes filled with pain. I told you," Shefu whispered, his voice weak. "I didn't kill him." "I know," Ade choked. Ade knelt beside Shefu, his chest tightening as he watched his oldest friend bleed out in front of him. His mind spun with guilt, disbelief, and grief, unable to comprehend the weight of everything he had just learned. Shefu's face was pale, his breathing shallow as his life slipped away. His hand twitched weakly, reaching toward Ade, a gesture not of anger but of final reconciliation. "I never hated you," Shefu whispered, his voice cracking with pain. "I just wanted you to believe me." Tears welled up in Ade's eyes, his heart heavy with the weight of his mistake. "I'm so sorry, Shefu," Ade said, his voice trembling. "I should have believed you. I should have stood by you." Shefu's eyes flickered, his breathing growing fainter. It's too late now." A single tear rolled down Ade's cheek. He had spent 15 years hating the wrong person, only to discover the truth when it was far too late. His brother, the one he had banished and cursed, was innocent all along. The guilt was unbearable. Shefu's chest rose and fell one last time before it stilled completely. His eyes remained open, staring lifelessly at the sky. Ade let out a broken cry, collapsing over Shefu's body, the crushing weight of his grief threatening to suffocate him. For a few moments, the world was silent. The forest around them seemed frozen in time. The only sound, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Ade remained on his knees, staring at Shefu's lifeless body, his mind replaying every memory, every shared moment, every decision he had made that led to this terrible end. Kwasi's body lay not far from them, his death the final act of a twisted plan that had destroyed everything. Even in death, Kwasi's face bore a cruel smile, as if pleased with the chaos and destruction he had wrought. Ade slowly rose to his feet, his entire body trembling, his mind raced with thoughts of the village, the years of pain and anger that had consumed him, and the bitter truth that had now been revealed. But more than anything, Ade was consumed with the realization that there was no justice, no redemption, no way to make things right. He turned and began walking back to the village, his heart hollow. When he arrived at the gates of Akuru, the villagers saw him covered in blood, Shefu's blood. Some began to whisper, others gasped in horror. Ade approached the village square where the elders gathered to hear what had happened. "What have you done?" one of the elders asked, her voice filled with shock and fear. Ade's gaze was distant, his face expressionless, as he recounted everything that had transpired. Kwasi's confession, the years of lies, and the deaths of both his best friends. The villagers listened in stunned silence as Ade revealed the truth. But when he finished, a murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. "He's lying," one villager muttered. "Kwasi would never do such a thing. He's trying to cover up for killing them both," another shouted. Despite everything Ade had told them, the villagers began to turn on him. The anger and fear that festered in Akuru for years boiled over, and they accused Ade of orchestrating the entire tragedy. They refused to believe that Kwasi, who had always been a quiet, unassuming man, could have been capable of such treachery. The elders, too, seemed swayed by the crowd's suspicions. Ade, who had once been revered as the son of Chief Ola, was now seen as a pariah, a murderer. His words fell on deaf ears, the truth buried under layers of distrust and fear. "Burn him!" somebody in the crowd shouted. "He killed his own father!" another voice cried. The villagers, whipped into a frenzy, descended upon Ade. They dragged him to the center of the village square, ignoring his desperate pleas for reason. The elders stood by, their faces cold and unmoving. No one was willing to listen to the truth anymore. As the villagers tied Ade to a stake, he could feel the heat of the flames rising around him. The pain in his heart was far greater than the fear of death. He had lost everything: his father, his best friend, and now even his life. But the greatest tragedy was that justice had never been served. With fire licking at his feet, Ade lifted his head to the sky and shouted in agony, his voice filled with the sorrow of a lifetime of betrayal and loss. "I curse you!" Ade screamed, his voice rising above the crackling flames. "I curse this village. May it rot. May nothing grow here, and may no living thing ever find peace in Akuru. You will all suffer for your blindness, for your refusal to see the truth. May this village die with me, and may it be forgotten for eternity." The villagers recoiled in fear as Ade's curse filled the air, his words laced with the bitterness of a life destroyed by lies. The flames consumed him, his body writhing in pain, but his voice carried on, echoing through the village long after his body turned to ash. When the fire finally died down, nothing was left but a charred stake and a handful of ashes. the village of Akuru fell silent, the weight of Ade's curse hanging heavy over the land. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen in Akuru. The crops withered, the animals that once roamed the fields grew sick and died, and the once thriving village seemed to decay from within. The people of Akuru grew fearful, believing that Ade's curse had taken hold. The air itself seemed thick with sorrow and despair, and one by one, families left the village, fleeing the land that had once been their home. Within a few short years, Akuru was abandoned. The huts crumbled, the farmland was overrun by weeds, and the village square, where so many had once gathered, became nothing but a barren wasteland. No one dared speak the name of Ade, Shefu, or Kwasi for fear that the curse might follow them wherever they went. The legend of Akuru became a cautionary tale passed down through the generations, a story of betrayal, jealousy, and the consequences of refusing to see the truth. The village, once a place of life and community, became a forgotten ruin, cursed for eternity just as Ade had vowed. No living thing ever grew there again, and in time, Akuru and the tragedy of the three friends were erased from memory, swallowed by the passage of time, leaving nothing but dust and silence in its wake. This heartbreaking story of friendship, grief, betrayal, and loss reminds us that most things are not what they seem on the surface. We must always seek the truth by any means necessary before carrying out harsh judgments upon those whom we suspect of foul play. Who knows, the truth might shock us to our core. The end. We hope you enjoyed the story you just watched. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video, as it helps us create more videos like this for you to enjoy. Thank you.